No one expected a high school graduation to turn into a battlefield of wills, but when two guards tried to move a black Marine from his daughter's ceremony, 6 Navy SEALs rose from the crowd, silencing the room with their presence alone. Elijah Caldwell didn't expect anyone to recognize him when he pulled into the parking lot behind Maplewood Academy. The building looked like most high schools in smaller Oregon towns. Weathered red brick, a few flags fluttering over the entrance, kids loitering near the gym doors. It was already crowded, parents in dress shirts, siblings holding signs, a grandmother leaning on a walker. It was all there. He'd parked his Ford Mustang near the chain-link fence and stepped out, smoothing the lines of his deep blue Marine uniform. His boots were polished to a mirror shine, not because he was trying to show off, but because there were things he didn't know how to do halfway. He looked around, his posture upright and firm, his face calm, but carrying the stillness of someone who had seen life from too many angles. He had driven 10 hours from Salem to make it to his daughter's high school graduation. He could have flown, but the Mustang was his wife's favorite car, and even after her passing 3 years ago, he still felt closer to her on the road. Elijah opened the car door and pulled out a small photograph from the glove compartment. It was old and worn, with a slight tear in the corner. His wife holding Amara when she was just a baby. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. "I promised you," he said softly, "I wouldn't miss it." The walk to the entrance was slow and intentional. Every step carried meaning, his chest filled with something he didn't have a name for, somewhere between pride and ache. Inside, the gym was packed. Metal chairs filled the floor, bleachers overflowing. The air smelled faintly of concession popcorn and floor wax. It was noisy, chaotic, alive. Elijah showed his printed ticket to a volunteer near the door, a short man with a clipboard and headset. The man squinted at it, nodded quickly, and pointed toward the 3rd row on the left. "You're good to go. Family seating up front." "Appreciate it," Elijah said, his voice steady. He made his way to the row, catching glimpses of other families as he passed. Some folks looked at him, did a double take of the uniform, then turned away like they hadn't. One woman gave him a small smile, then whispered something to the man beside her. Elijah didn't react. He'd been black, tall, and in uniform for a long time. He knew what some looks meant and what others didn't. He found his seat and sat down. The chair was plastic, slightly wobbly. He adjusted it without complaint. In front of him, the stage was set. Banners hung across the gym wall. Class of 2025 in big silver letters. A few school board members stood near the podium, checking notes. Elijah glanced at the rows of students lined up at the far end of the gym. Amara was somewhere in the middle, tall, lanky, with her mother's eyes. 19 years gone, just like that. He remembered holding her the night she was born, still in uniform, dirt under his fingernails. He'd flown in from Kuwait with only 4 days leave, and now, here they were. He sat still, barely blinking, soaking in the moment. Behind him, people continued filing in, chairs scraped, programs rustled, someone laughed too loud, a man dropped his coffee and muttered under his breath. None of it touched Elijah. His world was narrowed to the stage, the rows of young faces, and the weight of the photo against his chest. Then the music started. And the crowd rose to their feet. A few students looked nervous, others beamed. Elijah stood too, shoulders squared, arms at his sides. The national anthem followed. Everyone placed hands over hearts. Elijah didn't move. He didn't need to. His whole presence was a salute. He thought of his wife again, how she would have cried through the whole ceremony, how she would have fixed Amara's tie 3 times before letting her leave the house. His eyes stayed forward. But as the last note of the anthem faded, 2 uniformed men began walking down the side aisle, heading straight for him. The security guards moved with purpose. They weren't police. Their badges read Westfield Security Services, and their uniforms were standard, black polo shirts tucked into cargo pants, earpieces, radios on their belts. Neither looked older than 33. One was short and wide-shouldered, with a shaved head and a tight expression. The other was taller, lanky, chewing gum like he had somewhere better to be. Elijah noticed them right away, but didn't flinch. His training taught him long ago that stillness was often more commanding than movement. He kept his eyes forward, hands resting loosely on his thighs. The shorter guard stopped beside him and leaned down, just enough to be heard. "Excuse me, sir," he said in a low voice. "We're going to need you to come with us." Elijah slowly turned his head. "Is there a problem?" The tall one steps forward. "Yeah, this section's for families of graduating seniors." And I'm not family? Elijah's voice was calm but carried an edge, like a blade still sheathed. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the same printed ticket he'd shown at the door. This is my seat. 3rd row, left side, family seating. Confirmed. The shorter guy didn't even look at the ticket. We got told it's full. Elijah didn't move. It was full when I sat down too. You want to tell me who gave that order? The tall guard shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't expecting a calm, clear voice. Look, it's not a big deal. There's some extra seats in the back. Let's not make this anything it doesn't have to be. You're making it something, Elijah said, his eyes locking on to the tall guards. I drove 10 hours to watch my daughter walk across that stage. I'll be sitting right here. The shorter guard, Baxter, sneered slightly. You think that uniform gives you special privileges? This ain't the military, sir. A dream? Analysis. And Noel's gaze didn't waver. And you think that badge gives you authority? I'm not here to play games. Step away. A few heads started turning. A woman 2 rows over nudged her husband and nodded toward them. Someone in the bleachers tilted their phone, maybe recording. The short guard straightened up and looked around and said, I'm going to ask one more time. You can ask all day, Elijah said, his voice lower now, firmer. I'm not moving. The tall one, Donovan, sucked his teeth. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the back. That's what we're saying. And there it was. Elijah looked at him fully now. That phrase wasn't about logistics. It wasn't about policy. It was about something older, something quieter, something that had followed him all his life, in boardrooms, waiting rooms, front porches, and even the base cafeteria. Just behind a smile, just under a whisper. He didn't respond. The air shifted around them, the way it does when people sense a line has been crossed. Comfortable, Elijah repeated, his voice slow and deliberate. You don't get to decide where I'm comfortable. You don't get to decide where I belong. The short guard, Baxter, noticed the shift too. He adjusted the radio on his hip and muttered something into the mic, never breaking eye contact. Elijah stayed seated, staring forward like the conversation had ended, because for him, it had. A woman beside him, older and pale-skinned, leaned slightly toward him and whispered, Don't you let them move you. He nodded once, acknowledging her, but said nothing. He didn't want to make a scene. He wanted to watch his daughter graduate like any other father. But the guards weren't finished. Donovan lowered his voice again. Look, you got a problem? Take it up with the school office. We got our orders. Elijah turned his head toward him once more. You have a name, son? The guard blinked. It's Officer Donovan. Not officer, Elijah replied. You're private security. And you're causing a disturbance, Baxter snapped, stepping closer. You want to be a tough guy? Do it somewhere else. Elijah's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with quiet calculation. Tough guy? I'm a father trying to watch his daughter graduate. You're the one turning this into a circus. The other one stepped in. All right, that's enough. If you don't stand up, he didn't finish the sentence, because that's when the gym door at the far end clicked open and 6 men walked in. No uniforms, no badges, just firm postures, squared shoulders, and faces that said they'd been through worse things than awkward stares and misjudged instructions. They didn't walk in together. They filtered in one by one, taking different spots like they weren't there together. But anyone watching closely could tell they moved the same, watched the room the same, sat the same, still steady and alert. Elijah didn't look back. He didn't have to. He knew exactly who they were. But the guards didn't, at least not yet, and they were about to find out. Elijah kept his focus on the stage, his jaw unmoving, but his mind was turning. He wasn't angry, not yet, but something inside him clicked into place like a switch he didn't use unless he had to. The one built for survival, for balance, for patience under pressure. The 2 guards didn't leave. They hovered. It was the kind of hovering that wasn't about doing a job. It was about trying to remind someone they had power. But what they didn't understand was that Elijah had lived in places where power was life or death, not some gym with folding chairs and a sound system. A student's name was called from the stage, and the crowd clapped politely, but people nearby weren't paying attention to the ceremony anymore. They were watching the standoff, pretending not to. Donovan shifted his stance again, leaning closer, voice quieter. I'm trying to do you a favor here, all right? This doesn't need to get ugly. You don't have that kind of favor to offer, Elijah said, his voice a low rumble, each word deliberate. Donovan drew back slightly, as if reconsidering his next move, but Baxter was less subtle. He didn't like being challenged. His hand hovered near the radio again. You think you're untouchable because of that uniform? This is our turf, not yours. Elijah's eyes flicked to him. Your turf? You're standing in my daughter's moment, and you're making it about you. Step back before you regret it. A few rows behind, a man stood up slowly. Nobody noticed at first. He didn't say a word, just crossed his arms and stared, clean-shaven, broad frame, eyes sharp. He took a seat near the aisle without removing his gaze from the scene. A second man stood up on the opposite side of the gym, same posture, calm, intentional. Then a third. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Elijah knew them all. He didn't turn to look because his instincts didn't require confirmation. He had led these men through mud, gunfire, and silence darker than most could imagine. Baxter leaned down again, his voice carrying a new edge. Listen, man, you're making this into a situation. Elijah turned his head slowly, deliberately. And you're not listening. Baxter's hand twitched toward the radio again, but before he could say a word, a voice broke the tension from 10 feet away. Is there a reason this man's being bothered? It was clear, calm, controlled. The kind of voice that doesn't rise to get attention, but drops just enough to make everyone stop talking. It came from a man standing in the center aisle. Tall, salt and pepper beard, fitted black coat over a grey shirt. His name was Miles Thornton, the one Elijah had pulled from the wreckage in Fallujah, dragging him across 200 yards of sand while bullets rained down like gravel. Baxter looked up, caught off guard. Who are you? Miles didn't answer. He stepped forward once. I asked you a question. Donovan raised a hand. Sir, we've got this under control. No, Miles said, sharper now. You don't. This ain't your business, Baxter snapped, his voice rising. Sit down before you make this worse. Miles's eyes didn't flinch. You're harassing a man who's done more for this country than you'll ever understand. You want to talk about making things worse? Keep standing there. Another man stood up from the far bleachers, then another, 4 of them now. Elijah remained seated, still quiet. The entire left side of the gym was now watching openly. A boy pointed. A teacher tried to wave attention back to the stage, but nobody was looking at the diplomas anymore. Miles took one more step forward. You're embarrassing yourselves, and you're one breath away from making this worse. Baxter glanced at Donovan, who looked less confident by the second. It was clear now they hadn't expected backup, especially not backup like this. I don't care what your orders were, Miles said. You don't put your hands on that man. You don't tell him to move. You don't ask again. The silence in the gym felt tight, not from fear, but from respect. A quiet respect that started to swell as more people realized what was happening. Elijah finally looked up at Miles and gave the smallest nod. Not a thank you, not a request, just recognition. Miles's eyes softened for a moment, then he stepped back and took his seat, arms folded, but the tension hadn't left the air. Not yet. And the people watching were waiting to see what the guards would do next. The gym faded, the stage, the banners, the faces, all blurred into the background of Elijah's mind. His eyes were still open, but his memory yanked him backward 15 years to Iraq. It was late afternoon in Fallujah province. The sun didn't set gently there. It crashed down like a hammer, turning the sand to rust and the air to steel. Elijah, a gunnery sergeant back then, had just finished briefing his unit when everything went sideways. A roadside IED blew under their convoy, flipping the lead Humvee like a toy. Dirt and metal rained down before anyone could scream. Then came the gunfire. Not scattered, coordinated. Elijah didn't think. He moved. He ducked behind what was left of a door frame, surveying the chaos. Smoke clouded the edge of the valley, but he saw 6 men down, trapped behind the burning wreckage of a second vehicle. Most were pinned. One was already trying to crawl forward, dragging another by the vest. That was Miles Thornton, with just 3 months in country and a bullet through his thigh. Elijah bolted. No hesitation, no radio call. He ran through open ground, dodging bursts of gunfire, sliding into cover behind a blown axle. Miles looked up, blood on his temple, gasping. "You're bleeding," Elijah had said. "You noticed," Miles coughed. Elijah grabbed the straps of the downed soldier beside him, Mateo Vargas, and began pulling. Miles pushed from behind, wincing with every inch. "Where's Reyes?" Elijah shouted. Miles pointed weakly. "Left side, under the hood." That's when Elijah saw him. A young SEAL pinned under part of the engine block, leg trapped. He was yelling for help, but too far gone to move. Miles nodded. That's when he really started to understand what leadership looked like. Elijah sprinted across again. His foot hit gravel, then bone, but he didn't stop. He slid to Reyes, crouched low, and gripped the edge of the mangled hood with both hands. It wouldn't budge. "Gunny! Don't!" Reyes shouted. I'm good. You're not staying here." Elijah braced one foot, dug deep, and lifted. His shoulders strained, his ribs ached. The metal groaned but rose just enough for Reyes to yank his leg free. They fell back together, crawling toward the ridgeline. Gunfire cracked overhead. Miles returned with Vargas limping on his good leg. Two others followed, Chen and Norton, faces blackened with ash, rifles at the ready. When the firing stopped, there were no cheers, no victory speech, just silence and breathing. All 6 of them were alive. Elijah was the last to check out. He stayed on rear watch until the dust settled and the medevac arrived. He didn't speak for a long time after that, but Miles remembered. They all did. After that day, there was never a doubt. If Elijah asked for anything, anywhere, anytime, they'd be there, no matter what. Back in the gym, Miles sat quietly, eyes fixed on the guards, still standing near Elijah. He wasn't thinking about war. He was thinking about promises. The man who had dragged him out of a war zone was now being hassed in front of a high school stage for trying to watch his daughter graduate. He clenched his fists. Another SEAL, Gabriel Ortiz, walked in and sat 4 rows back. Then, Lucas Hayes found a spot along the right side bleachers. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Elijah glanced toward the back of the gym now, just briefly. His eyes met Ortiz. That was enough. But the guards didn't understand what those looks meant. Not yet. And the moment they made the next move, they'd learn real fast. The ceremony pressed on, at least on the surface. Names were still being called, families clapped, some too loudly, trying to cover up the tension that now thickened the air. But the attention had shifted. Eyes that had once been glued to the stage now kept drifting toward the 3rd row on the left, where Elijah Caldwell sat like a statue, and 2 guards stood like they didn't know what to do next. Baxter glanced toward the front, where a school official tried to get his attention. The woman looked nervous, mouthing something and gesturing subtly toward the guards, but Baxter shook his head. He wasn't ready to walk away. He'd started something, and his ego didn't know how to back down. Donovan shifted his weight, his jaw working harder on the gum, clearly uncomfortable, but not leaving either. "Sir," Baxter said again, this time louder, "this is your last warning." And Elijah didn't move. To do what exactly? Baxter stepped forward, leaning so close his belt brushed Elijah's knee. "To stop making a scene. We don't want any trouble. Just move to the back." Elijah turned his head and looked him dead in the eye. "You're the only one causing trouble?" Baxter's nostrils flared. "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than everybody else? This is a high school, man, not your base." "And you think that radio makes you a cop?" Elijah shot back, his voice steady but piercing. "You're out of your depth, and you don't even know it." A hush fell across the rows around them. A little girl stopped squirming in her seat. A dab with the camera froze mid-zoom. Even Donovan took a half step back, like the words had landed heavier than he expected. Elijah didn't blink. He took a breath, not to calm himself, but to stay grounded. "You need to walk away." Baxter didn't. Instead, his hand dropped to the front of his belt. Not on a weapon, but near enough to feel threatening. "Keep talking, and you'll be out of here in cuffs," he hissed. That's when Miles stood up. He didn't yell, didn't posture. He just stepped into the aisle, slow and focused, like the conversation had become his business now. The gym wasn't dead silent, but close. Miles's voice was clear. "If you touch him, you'll answer to me." Baxter turned his head. "And who the hell are you?" Miles took another step forward. "The man who's telling you this ends right now." You don't scare me," Baxter said, but his voice wavered slightly. "This is our job. Back off." Miles's eyes burned with quiet intensity. "Your job? You're picking a fight with a Marine who's earned his place here. You want to talk about jobs? I'd bet my life you've never faced a real fight in yours." One of the school board members noticed what was happening and whispered something to the principal. An assistant principal got up and started moving toward the back of the gym, probably calling someone on the walkie clipped to her side. The school's staff was finally realizing this wasn't going to die down quietly. More SEALs rose from their seats, spread across the room. No formation, no spoken cue, just a unified instinct that kicked in all at once. By now, all 6 were standing. Baxter looked round, realizing they weren't just dealing with some angry parent. Something was different. These men didn't fidget. They didn't shift from foot to foot. Their presence filled the space like pressure before a storm. Miles took a step closer. "You've got 2 choices. Walk away now, or watch this go somewhere you don't want it to go." Donovan's voice cracked through. "Let's just back off, man." But Baxter still hesitated. Elijah spoke again, not to Baxter, but to Miles. Don't waste your breath. He already made his decision. Miles smiled. He just lowered his voice one last time. Don't mistake silence for weakness. Finally, Baxter stepped back. Not much, but enough. His hand dropped away from his belt. His face burned, but he was outnumbered and outclassed. The principal appeared near the aisle, whispering quickly to the guards. Whatever she said was quiet but firm enough to send them both walking toward the back exit. They didn't look at anyone on their way out. Elijah exhaled, slow and steady. Miles sat back down without a word. All 6 seals remained standing, but the moment still hung in the air. And Amara Caldwell was watching everything from the lineup of students, her hands clenched at her sides. Amara Caldwell was near the center of the graduating class, standing between a girl with bright braids and a boy whose gown kept slipping off his shoulders. They were trying to focus on the ceremony, laughing nervously, checking their name cards like the world was normal. But Amara's world wasn't. She had seen the 2 guards walking toward her father from the minute the anthem ended. At first she thought maybe it was just routine, maybe they were helping someone find a seat. But something in her chest told her different. Then she saw the way her dad sat. So still, so composed, but locked in. She'd seen that look before. The same one she'd caught when she was 13 and came home crying because someone at school had said something they shouldn't have. Her dad didn't raise his voice then either. He just sat with that same expression, like steel that refused to bend. Mara kept her eyes on the scene as best she could from her place in line. She couldn't hear what was said, but the body language told her enough. She saw the guards standing too close, saw her father calmly staying seated, and then she saw a man stand up, a tall guy in a dark coat. Somehow, Amara knew that wasn't just a parent. That man knew her father. The way he moved, the way he placed himself between the guard and the row, it was clear he wasn't there for drama. He was there for Elijah Caldwell. Then another man stood, and another. It wasn't loud, but it was like the temperature in the room shifted. Everyone was watching now. Amara's heart beat faster. She wasn't scared, she was something else, torn between pride and fire. She had grown up hearing pieces of her dad's service stories, not the gory parts. Her dad kept most of those to himself, but bits here and there, a buddy who sent Christmas cards every year, a scar that came from somewhere out in the dust, a box in the garage marked Fallujah that nobody ever opened. She never knew the names, never saw the faces, but now they were here, standing like they'd been waiting for this moment, like they'd never stopped having her dad's back. Amara blinked hard, pushing down the burn behind her eyes. She didn't want to cry. Not here, not now. The line moved forwards. A few names were called. The clapping picked back up slowly, like someone had hit play again after a pause. But the room wasn't the same anymore. The energy had shifted. It wasn't about balloons or banners now. It was about respect. One of the assistant principals tapped Amara's shoulder and said something she didn't hear. She just nodded. The student next to her leaned over and whispered, "At your dad?" Amara didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The entire gym had seen it, and now everyone in that building understood what kind of man Elijah Caldwell was. In the audience, Miles remained standing. He didn't look around for approval. He wasn't scanning for attention. He was watching Elijah, still seated in the same plastic chair, hands resting on his lap, eyes locked on the stage like nothing had happened. But something had. The rest of the SEALs stayed on their feet too, not posturing, just present. Their silence spoke louder than any microphone ever could. A few parents clapped louder now with each name, almost as if they were trying to make up for the tension earlier. The gym had become a living thing, stirred awake by a moment of injustice, held steady by the weight of honor. Elijah remained still, not defiant, not bitter, just present, a father watching his daughter take one more step into adulthood. But the moment that would break through all of it was still coming, and when Amara's name was finally called, the room wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. The line was moving faster now. Some students were still fidgeting, adjusting caps, whispering jokes under their breath, trying to enjoy the moment. But Amara wasn't in that space anymore. Her mind kept flashing back to her father, sitting alone, surrounded by faces, but completely centered in that chair, like it had been built just for him. There was something about how he held himself, calm, quiet, unshakable, and something about the way those men, those warriors, rose around him without needing to be asked. Amara realized for the first time that she didn't really know the full weight her father carried. Sure, she'd seen the pictures, the medals in the old wooden box, the folded flag tucked into the bookshelf in the living room, but those things never really spoke. They just sat there like relics. Today they walked, today they stood. The assistant principal called out the next name, then another. Amara was 3 people away from the stage. She wiped her palms on her gown, tried to slow her breathing. The girl in front of her turned and grinned nervously. "You ready?" Amara smiled a little. "More than you know." She stepped forward. On the other side of the gym, Elijah leaned slightly forward. His eyes never left the stage. He didn't clap for every student. Not out of disrespect, but because his focus had narrowed to the girl in the black robe with the red and white honor cords, the girl who looked so much like her mother when she smiled. 1 name, 2 names. Then the announcer paused for a second, cleared her throat, and spoke with a bit more weight than before. Amara Caldwell. The name echoed. There was a beat of silence, half a second, maybe less, before the room erupted. Clapping, whistling, cheering. But what stood out wasn't the volume, it was the rhythm of it. The sound wasn't chaotic, it was deliberate, coordinated, deep. The 6 seals, still standing, raised their hands and applauded in perfect unison. Each one clapped with force, not performance, but a salute, a gesture that said, "We see you, we see your father, we honor both." Amara walked across the stage slowly, chin high, step steady. Her heart pounded, but it wasn't nerves. It was pride. Not just pride in herself, but pride in knowing exactly who her father was and what it meant to carry that last name. She took her diploma from the principal, shook her hand, and turned toward the audience. Her eyes scanned for one person, found him. Elijah didn't wave, didn't stand. He just met his daughter's eyes and gave the smallest, most meaningful smile of the day. Amara nodded once and stepped off the stage. The applause still hadn't died down. Parents who hadn't said a word all ceremony were now clapping hard. Some stood, a few wiped their eyes, not sure exactly why, but feeling like they'd just witnessed something that mattered. Elijah sat back in his chair and let the moment wash over him. He wasn't the kind of man to cry in public, but inside something loosened. Not grief, not pain, just release. The kind that only comes when the circle feels complete, even if it never really is. The other names continued, but something had shifted. From that moment on, every student who walked the stage walked in the echo of what had just happened. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was viral, but because it was real. But the story didn't end with the applause. When father and daughter met again outside the gym, it would be more than just a proud hug. It would be the passing of something deeper. The final name was called 30 minutes later. Everyone stood as the graduating class threw their caps, screamed with relief, and hugged like they hadn't seen each other in years. Phones went up, cameras clicked, balloons bobbed above the crowd as the students began filing out through the gym's double doors toward the back lot. Elijah didn't move right away. He sat quietly as the noise swelled around him, soaking it all in. The music, the laughter, the flash of silver and red gowns sweeping by. His eyes followed Amara as she disappeared into the hallway with her classmates. Her teacher gave her a high five, another pulled her in for a side hug, but even with all the chaos, Amara turned once, just once, and looked back. Elijah caught it. A brief glance, but it held everything. "Did you see me?" And Elijah's expression gave the answer every second. The crowd began to thin, people shuffled out with flowers and balloons, congratulating each other in loud bursts. Elijah stood slowly stretching his legs, feeling the weight of sitting in one position for too long. Miles walked over as the gym emptied. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at Elijah, then toward the exit. "You okay?" Miles finally asked. Elijah nodded. "I've been through worse." Miles smiled slightly. "Yeah, but it still shouldn't have happened." "No," Elijah said, "it shouldn't have." Another SEAL, Gabriel Ortiz, joined them. "We tried to stay low-key, but once that guy put his hand near his belt..." Elijah raised a hand gently. "You all did what needed to be done. That was enough." The 3 men stood there for a few seconds longer, letting the noise drain from the room. Then Elijah said, "I want to see my girl." Outside, the sun was fierce against the concrete, casting long shadows from the bleachers onto the back lot. Students were scattered in small clusters, posing for photos, throwing their caps again, calling out to relatives. Amara stood near the flagpole, her gown half unzipped, the diploma folder in one hand and her phone in the other. When she saw her father approach, she stopped mid-conversation. The crowd around her faded into the background. They met halfway. Amara was the first to speak. "You okay?" Elijah nodded. "You?" "Yeah," Amara said, then looked down for a second. "They tried to move you, I know." Mara's jaw flexed. "I was ready to walk off that stage, Dad. I swear, I was 2 seconds from saying something." Elijah placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "And that's why you didn't." Amara looked up. "What do you mean?" "Because you knew I could handle it, and because you handled your moment like a woman, and didn't let anybody take it from you." Amara held her breath for a second. Who were those guys that stood up? Elijah glanced behind him. The 6 SEALs were now outside too, gathered near the exit, talking quietly. They weren't looking for attention, just keeping an eye out, like always. "They're men I bled with, men who know what loyalty means," Elijah said. "Men who don't forget." Amara nodded slowly. "That was powerful." "It was necessary," Elijah replied. "Sometimes silence is louder than shouting, and sometimes standing up without speaking says more than 1,000 words." For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Amara smiled. "You going to tell me those war stories now?" "Yeah," Elijah chuckled. "Some of them. You're old enough for the real parts now." They stood there, shoulder to shoulder, not just father and daughter, but 2 people connected by something that couldn't be explained, only lived. Across the lot, Miles raised a hand. Not a wave, just a gesture of respect. Amara returned it without hesitation. The sun kept climbing, but for the Caldwell family, time moved differently now. But one more moment remained, because, after all that, the real lesson hadn't yet been spoken aloud. Most of the crowd had cleared by the time Elijah and Amara walked back to the parking lot. A few families still lingered, laughing around folding chairs or loading up trunks with flower arrangements and graduation gifts, but the buzz had quieted, and the sun had softened into early evening light. Elijah unlocked the Mustang, the same one his wife used to drive to parent-teacher meetings and weekend road trips. Amara paused at the passenger door, running her fingers along a scratch near the handle. "She would have been screaming the loudest today," she said softly. "She would have made you retake every photo until your smile looked just right," Elijah replied, managing a grin. They climbed in, shutting the doors behind them. The car was warm from the sun but felt like a cocoon, sealed off from the rest of the world. For a few breaths, Amara turned to face her father. "I gotta ask, why didn't you say anything to those guards? You just sat there." Elijah tapped the steering wheel once, then turned to her. "Because I don't have to stand up for who I am, and I don't need to raise my voice to be heard." Amara looked out the window for a second, chewing on that. "You know how many times in my life I've had to choose between letting something slide or blowing it up?" Elijah continued. "That moment today, what those men tried to do, it wasn't new, but how we respond, that's what defines it." "But they disrespected you," Amara said, "in front of everybody." "Yes," Elijah said, "and everyone saw it, but they also saw the truth. They saw 6 men who had every reason to be somewhere else stand up, not because I asked, but because they knew what that moment meant." Amara sat with that. "Daughter," Elijah said, "life will hand you 100 chances to react with anger, and sometimes anger is justified. But most times, silence cuts deeper. Dignity sticks longer. That's what people remember." And he reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded photo, the one of Amara as a baby, his late wife cradling her. "I carried this with me through Fallujah. I carried it through losing your mum, and I carried it here today, not because it gives me strength, but because it reminds me of what's worth protecting." Ahara's voice dropped. "You always knew who had your back?" Elijah smiled. "I didn't need to know. I just had faith. Real men don't vanish when things get uncomfortable. They show up, and they stand." There was a pause before Amara spoke again. "I want to be like that, like you." "You already are," Elijah said. "You walked that stage with pride. You didn't let anger steal your moment. You stayed grounded, even when everything around you was trying to throw you off balance." Outside the car, the last of the SEALs were getting into their vehicles. Miles gave one last look toward the Mustang before driving off. Elijah nodded once. No words, just the quiet acknowledgement of something permanent. Amara leaned back in the seat. "So, what now?" Elijah turned the key in the ignition. The engine rumbled to life. "Now we drive home. You get to choose dinner." Amara grinned. "Taco Bell." Elijah chuckled, of course. As they pulled out of the lot, the school faded behind them, but the memory of what happened inside that gym wouldn't fade anytime soon, not for anyone who was there. And for Amara, that day would mark something far greater than a diploma. It was the day she realized womanhood had nothing to do with noise and everything to do with how you carry yourself when the world stops watching. Some people shout to be seen, others just sit in silence and are never forgotten. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded what true strength